All right, I've just been given the thumbs up. So I think we're going to get started in a minute. Hey, Dave, does this work? And, but it's on, but it's not moving. There we go. Okay. Thank you, Amy. Run them in. All right, people are still trickling in, so we'll wait a minute here. Hi, Tom. We're still getting settled. Well, there's still a bunch of people out there that are talking that I imagine will work their way in, but... Oh, there we go. Tom's making the announcement. There we go. It's nice to know I've got cheerleaders back there. Yes, a little bit. You did what you could. All right, we'll go and get started anyway. Cattle prod? Only if it's that electrified type, you know. Was there anybody that was downstairs that didn't have a chance to take the Lord's Supper this morning? Definitely do not want to overlook that. All right, so everybody had the chance. So what I wanted to do this morning, the last time that I taught, I had finished up the book of Genesis. Now, I've been working my way through the history of the Hebrew people through Genesis. I first taught my lesson back in February 16th of 2020. So I've been working on this topic for 2.5 years. And you thought our Hebrews study was bad. 2.5 years I've been working on this. That was even before the whole time COVID started. So I had that intermission period in there when we had to stay away from each other and all that fun stuff. Yeah, those were some interesting church days. But we got through all these other different lessons. Now, I'm a big believer in repetition is a good teacher. So what I wanted to do this morning was just kind of do a little walk back through Genesis. So I want to do 40 chapters in 40 minutes. So I get a chapter a minute. But going back to what we had originally talked about, 2.5 years ago, why are we even bothering to study this? What's important about Genesis? We're a New Testament church. Why are we studying the Old Testament?
History. It's our beginning. History.
That is, we're still not having the thing here, but I had to, bring my little illustration of Noah's Ark overflowing with the animals. The Bible is not a book of fables. It is world history. This is where we came from, and we need to treat it as such. We need to know our history. But why else? Why else should we study it?
Prophecy.
There's prophecy, and that really ties into, even though some people claim, we're a New Testament church, we need to study the New Testament, we're not going to understand the New Testament to its full degree if we don't understand the Old. And I loved having that example this morning of Romans chapter 9. How many Old Testament names did we talk about in that book? Just this morning, this lesson. All the people that we've been studying in Genesis. Now, if we didn't know the histories of those people, could we have fully understood Romans chapter 9? Not nearly as well. So if we don't have that background, then we're not going to have the full knowledge of the New Testament. There was another reason I think the Old Testament's important, and it just gives us a different characteristic of God. The New Testament, you have focus on the love of God, which is absolutely important. God loves us all and he sent his son to die for us. What's the Old Testament focus on? The wrath and justice of God. And the two work together. God is not fully love and he is not fully wrath. He is truth and love. And the Old Testament brings out that truth. And if we don't have that healthy fear, that healthy respect for God, we're not going to appreciate him sacrificing his son and saving us from what he did. So the Old Testament, I think, is so important for us just to learn and get that background on. So if you remember 2.5 years ago, and again, I will apologize for my voice. So I've had a little cold earlier in the week that I'm kind of fighting over. And then my uncle really wanted to cut firewood yesterday afternoon, so I was out in the cold for several hours, but, made him happy. So, all right, I embellished a little bit. I wanted to do it. He just helped me. But we're going to just kind of bear with me. So we all started with one man. And again, I apologize because I had some really nice slides to go back through. So if you really want to keep turning around to see pictures, you can do that. Who did we start with 2.5 years ago? Not Adam. I didn't go back that early. Abraham. We all started with Abraham. See, my whole focus of this was to study the history of the Jewish race, and that started with Abraham. So God first called Abraham from the land of Ur. Again, there's a nice map back there. I get to see it. God called Abraham and his family from the land of Ur. They walked their way up to Canaan. But what happened to Abraham's father at Haran? This was when he went to Ur, I'm going to make a lot of hand motions. Here we go. Up to Haran. What happened to his father? Did his father continue with him to the land of Canaan? Remember, his father stayed there. He did not complete the journey, and it fell to Abraham, along with Lot, his wife Sarah, and their servants to travel on down to Canaan where God had promised. When they got to Canaan, did the group stay there? Or did they keep going somewhere else? They kept going to the land of Egypt. Now, what was important in Egypt was Abraham told his wife to say something, tell everybody who she was. His sister. Why did he want everybody to think that she was his sister? He was afraid somebody was going to see her and steal her away and get rid of the husband in the process. What happened? Did his thought come true? Absolutely. Pharaoh took an interest in Sarah, took her into his household. God did not like this, caused some things to happen. Eventually, Pharaoh finds out, and he kicks Abraham and Sarah and company out of Egypt. What did he give to them in the process? He kicked them out, but he gave them gifts financially, and also what else? Servants. And what was likely the name of one of these servants? Starts with an H. Ends with a gar. Tom, you got it? Hey, there you got it. Likely Hagar, she was an Egyptian. We know this from the text. She probably came from this encounter with Pharaoh and left with the company back to Canaan. Now, this all came back. Abraham was told by God, and in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. I missed that text. This is the key of where it all starts. How is that blessing foretold? We know this in one person, Jesus Christ. The whole reason, again, we are studying Abraham is because this is where the promise was given. Zach talked on this morning. He kept talking about the promise, the promise. This is where the promise starts with one man in Abraham, in the land of Canaan. That's why God had called him there. So Abraham, they finally get back to Canaan after Egypt. To all this wealth between Lot and Abraham caused what? Some friction, some arguments, some disagreements. So what happens to Abraham and Lot? They separate and go different ways. What two cities does Lot end up around? Sodom and Gomorrah. Yes, wonderful places of Sodom and Gomorrah. However, Abraham soon has to come to Lot's rescue, and then as he comes back from saving his nephew and their family, what mysterious person does he meet? King Melchizedek. Anybody want to explain who Melchizedek is? Nope, this is just a summary lesson. We're not going to get into it, but a fascinating person we learned through the Old Testament and also a lot in the book of Hebrews. All right, so soon after this encounter, God appears to Abraham again, saying that he's going to bless him even more. Abraham is in a moment of depression because he says, what's the point? I don't have anybody to leave it to. I don't have any children. I mean, God's saying, I'm going to bless you, make you a great nation. What's the point of it all? You just kind of see a downtrodden, depressed Abraham. God gives Abraham a promise. He says, I am going to give you an heir. I am going to give you a son to carry this promise that I've given you through. Now, after trying for less than a year, Sarah and Abraham becomes frustrated because they're not getting the job done. Sarah's not pregnant. Less than a year. This is when Sarah has the wonderful idea Zach mentioned this morning. Hey, here's Hagar, my servant. Why don't you go have a child with her? And then I will take her child from her and raise it as my very own. How did that work out? Not too well. This was a very dumb idea, and for some reason, Abraham went along with it. But Ishmael was the result. Their runoff, God says, go back, and Ishmael becomes Abraham's only son for 13 years. Now, can you imagine the bond that they've had? Abraham is a first-time father. Here's Ishmael, 13 years. Do you think they bonded? Do you think they had a close relationship? Absolutely. And this is why, as Zach pointed out again this morning, see, this is why it all kind of ties together. If you don't understand the Old Testament, you're not going to understand the New Testament. So, as he pointed out, Abraham begged God, let Ishmael be the son of my promise. No, it's going to be someone else. So 13 years later, the promise does come true in that Abraham and Sarah, they have a child at the ages of 99 and 89, and they name him Isaac. Now, right around that same time, there is another famine. Famine is a good repetition thing in the Old Testament. They go from the land of Canaan over to the coast where there's food. Now, they go to a new territory. Sarah is still apparently a very attractive woman. Because what does Abraham tell her to say again? That you're my sister, yet again. We got again, repetition.
How old was she?
At the great age of 89, so she held her age well.
Yes.
Yep. So at this point, it's not Pharaoh, it's King Abimelech that takes an interest in Sarah, pulls her into his household. Again, God doesn't like this. He tells Abimelech, knock it off. He sends them away again with more stuff. Abraham is just getting richer and richer and richer by all the lies. Not really a great way to do it, but that's what happened, and that's how God chose to bless him. So he has more servants, more wealth, but the famine's over, and he finally settles down. Isaac is born. They grow up, and at the age of 175, Abraham finally passes away, and he is buried in the cave of Machpelah that he bought from the Hittite people. Where did he get the money from? Pharaoh and Abimelech, more than likely. All this wealth God used. They bought the cave, and both Ishmael and Isaac come together, and they bury Abraham next to Sarah. So that completed our little history of Abraham. Next, we moved on into Isaac. Now, prior to Abraham's death, Abraham decided that Isaac needs the wife. He's 40 years old. He's unmarried. Come on, you got to get things done. So he decides to help him out. At the age of 40, he sends a servant back to Haran. So remember, they went from Ur to Haran. A lot of the family ended up staying there. Abraham and company went on down to Canaan. Yeah, you need to go back to Haran. Find me a wife for my son, is what he tells the servant. So the servant goes back, and he finds a woman named Rebecca. Yeah, this still ain't going to work, but if you want to look back, there's a nice little family chart of how they're related that you can't see from this down. But still, they are married, and then after 20 years of not having any children, they have twin boys named Jacob and Esau. Who's the older one? Esau's the older one. There we go. Now, on a side note, and I used this. All right, turn around, look at this one. You're going to actually see this one. Now, we looked at this chart several times over our lessons. We're at over 2,000 years since the world was created. 2,000 years. But how many direct connections does it take to get back from Jacob to Adam? This is physically, you could talk to somebody who could talk to somebody who could talk to somebody. How many of those steps between Jacob and Adam, the first man? 3. Over a period of 2,000 years. You have Jacob and Esau overlap with Shem by 59 years, Shem and Methuselah, 98 years, and then Methuselah and Adam himself for over 243 years. Do you think these people met each other? Do you think they talked? They lived hundreds of years. I think they had some family reunions. Probably. They probably got together. So it's amazing to me, and maybe you guys don't care, but just that these people could have talked to someone who could have talked to someone, and suddenly you're 2,000 years later. Now, we all know the game of telephone is horrible. You get past like 5 people and it's a totally different message. You only got 3 links here. So this is how history would have been passed down. I just find that fascinating. That's why I keep bringing it up. All right, back to Jacob and Esau. The twins have very different personalities. Genesis 25:27 says that Esau became a skillful hunter and a man of the field. He's a manly man. With my voice, I kind of feel that way this morning. But Jacob, he was a peace-loving man. He liked to live at tents. He was the homebody. Isaac and Rebekah, they had favorites too. Who did Isaac like? Esau. Who did Rebekah like? Jacob. Yes, I know, it's very poor parenting, but they had favorites. So Esau, he seems to also have been a little dramatic, because what happened when he came back from a failed hunting expedition, and Jacob, who was the homebody, was there making a nice pot of soup. What did Esau say? Before that, I'm starving, I'm gonna die. Now, he'd just been on a hunting trip, and he just walked back into camp. Do you really think he was on the verge of death? Probably not, a little dramatic. But then we get to the whole birthright for stew incidents. He wants some soup. Jacob sees an opportunity. Hey, sell me your birthright, and here is this lovely pot of soup. And bread. There is bread mentioned as well, so that maybe that sealed the deal for him. Esau says absolutely and walks out to camp. But now Jacob has an agreement for the birthright. What is the Old Testament birthright? Comes in 2 parts. It usually goes to the firstborn. He would have had first rights to it. But it is divided into, you get twice as much stuff as everybody else. So you would take the number of heirs, women, take the number of men, divide that in equal portion. The birthright person gets 1 extra portion. He gets twice as much. But also, he gets leadership of the family clan, because this is a kind of clan society. When the patriarch dies, that birthright individual suddenly is now in charge of everybody else and has basically ultimate power in the group. There happens to be another famine in the area. This is after Jacob has married Rebekah. Esau and Jacob are born. I think I got those names right. If not, you know who I'm talking about. There is another famine yet again in the land of Canaan. Now, where has food near the coast, they again decide to kind of retrace their family steps and go back to where King Abimelech is in charge. Isaac tells Rebekah to say something. That she is his sister. This is the apple in the tree thing. It's just, it's not really a good idea. It hasn't worked before, but for some reason, the men are just, I guess, afraid of dying. So they tell their wives, who are apparently very attractive, to say, you are my sister. Again, it works out. King Abimelech takes Rebekah into her house, discovers the reception, and again kicks them out of the country, but allows them to settle on the edge of his territory near Beersheba. 40 years pass. And Isaac's health apparently isn't good. We don't know if it's some kind of sickness, but he thinks he's about to die because he decides that he needs to pass his blessing on to Esau, the firstborn. Apparently he doesn't know about the whole birthright for stew interaction, and Esau really isn't telling him. So he sends Esau away on a hunting trip to go buy some food so they can make this meal and do the blessing. Who overhears this little command? Mom. Does Mom like Esau, or does she like Jacob? She likes Jacob. She sees a chance to slip her son into the deal. They trick Isaac into giving Jacob the blessing. As soon as Esau comes home, ready to get the blessing, he finds out what's happened. What's his attitude? Yeah, you could say that, because the exact words are, I'm going to kill you, brother. Yeah, he's not happy at all. Rebekah is afraid for her son, so what does she decide to do? She wants to send her son away. Hey, Isaac, our son's not married. Maybe I should just send him away to go find a wife. That gets him away from Esau, and he may not die. Also, he'll find a wife. Where does she send him back? To the brother, to Haran, where all the wives apparently come from. Jacob, on his first night, what seems like his first night of traveling back to Haran, he has a dream. What was his dream? The stairway to heaven. This is the first recorded account of God speaking to Jacob, which happens right after Jacob received the promise from Isaac. Do you think there's a consequence or a coincidence here? Abraham passed the promise to Isaac, who had just immediately passed it to Jacob. You almost kind of see God up there. Finally, I can now talk to Jacob. You've passed the promise along, Father. And he says that I'm going to again make you a great nation, and I'm going to bring you back to this land. Jacob's sleeping on a rock. Maybe that's why he just had a really bad dream. I'm not sure either. But he gets up, he creates an altar, he anoints the rock, and then he travels on to Haran with this blessing, knowing that God is looking after him and is going to bring him back. This had to be a great comfort. So he gets to Haran, he makes this 500-mile journey on foot to find a wife. He gets to the field, and who does he meet tending sheep? The lovely Rachel. She's the daughter of Uncle Laban. Jacob stays with the family for around a month before he strikes a deal with Uncle Laban for Rachel. What was the deal? 7 years for a woman. Okay, I guess that's a good deal in those days. He agrees, he works for the 7 years, they have the wedding. However, what happens the morning after the wedding feast? Who does Jacob find lying next to him? Leah. Uncle Laban's pulled a fast one. Leah was the older one. Laban's defense is, well, I can't marry the younger one off until I marry the older one off. So Jacob strikes another deal, which is 7 years for the other one. I mean, you think Laban could have got a better deal for it, but still, 7 for Rachel, you think you could at least get, or 7 for Leah, vice versa. And if you want to look back, now you can see the nice little family connection of we have Jacob married to Leah and Rachel, which starts off our whole nother family tree that you cannot see. Now, what were Leah and Rachel's wedding presents from their father? They each got one. Handmaidens. They actually got a servant. So you had Zilpah and Bilhah. Zilpah and Bilhah working for Laban. He says, my daughters are now married. They're creating their own households. They need servants as well. Hey, you are now going to be employed by my daughter. So they each have a handmaiden. They create their own family unit. And as we talked about this morning, God saw that Leah was unloved, so she's the one that began to have children first. And again, you can't see it, but she has Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. So she has 4 sons. Rachel has none at this point. Rachel's jealous, so she comes up with a plan. What was her plan? Hey, here's my handmaiden. Jacob, why don't you marry her, have a child? I'll take that child and raise it up on my own. I mean, you see the Genesis repetition here. And the plan never works out, but yet they keep doing it. So Jacob says, hey, that sounds like a great idea. Really bad idea. But he then is married to Bilhah, who then has Dan and Naphtali. Leah hasn't had any kids for a while, so she says, hey, maybe I'll pull the same trick. I've got a handmaiden too. Hey, Jacob, why don't you take Zilpah and have children with her? Jacob again, that's a great idea. Not smart. He marries Zilpah. She then has Gad and Asher. Then we have the mandrake incident. I'm not going to go into that again, but that results in Leah having Issachar, followed soon by Zebulun, and Jacob's only known daughter, Dinah. So, if you were looking in the back and keeping score, this means Leah has 6, Bilhah 2, Zilpah 2, and Rachel with a big 0. However, the Bible says that God remembered Rachel, and she finally gives birth to her first son, who is Joseph. All right, so by this time, Jacob's work for women deal is over. Jacob learns that Jacob talks to Laban about leaving with his wives and children. Now, Laban doesn't want to lose this large family unit, but also Jacob's been pretty prosperous for Laban. He doesn't want to lose a good employee. So they come out with another deal. This time it's a work for, you remember? Livestock arrangement. So Jacob, he's going to go through all of Laban's animals. He's going to take all the unpure animals as payment. Now, unpure meant what? Speckled, spotted, they just looked different. There wasn't anything wrong with the animal, anything wrong with the meat. They just looked funny. So he said, I will take all these impure animals, and then I will continue to work for you, but I'm going to have my own herd. That'll be my payment. Now, through Jacob's own knowledge and through God's blessings, I definitely don't want to hit that part. Through God's blessings, Jacob ends up with a much larger and a much higher quality flock than Uncle Laban. And he starts to recognize that those, friendly family feelings are starting to kind of not be so friendly anymore, because Laban's starting to get pretty jealous. He has a bigger herd than me. His animals look a whole lot better than me. Jacob realizes it's time to leave, talks to his wives, they agree, and when Uncle Laban is away for several days, they slip out in the middle of the night, so to speak. Laban comes back, doesn't like seeing him gone, takes off after him, and after 7 days, he catches up with him. Not very happy. However, God talks to Laban the night before, basically says, watch yourself. They finally get together, they agree to part ways, and Jacob is now free from Uncle Laban with his very large family unit at this point. So Jacob, he's escaped one threat, but now there's a new one. What's that? He's gone home. There's somebody there that doesn't like him. His brother Esau. So Jacob, he sends messengers to find Esau and tell him that after 20 years, I'm coming home, brother. I can't wait to see you. The messengers return, saying that Esau is so excited about Jacob coming home, he's coming to meet him with 400 heavily armed men. They're going to throw him a welcome home party, right? No. Jacob is scared. The Bible actually says he was greatly afraid and distressed. Jacob does two things. First one, which is very smart. He prays to God. He asks for help. The second one, he creates bribes to send out in front of Esau. Not the smartest, but hey, that works. 550 animals. That's his payment to Esau, not to kill him. That's what he finds. The night before they meet, Jacob is alone, and he ends up wrestling with a man. Who is the man? It actually says God. So a God, angel representative, some form of heavenly being. We'll go with that. But most likely, God in the flesh. Spirit, Christ, you can make whatever conclusion you want there. And they fight until morning. God finally dislocates Jacob's hip, and he changes his name from Jacob to Israel. Jacob, do you remember what that meant? So Jacob was more of the deceiver, the schemer, the heel catcher, not really good names. But Israel, Lonnie had it right, was Prince of God. That's a much better sounding name. So Jacob is now Israel. The encounter seems to make a difference, because instead of hiding behind women and children and animals like he was doing before the encounter with God, he decides to walk out in front and meet Esau face to face. Now, instead of Esau taking revenge, what happens? You've got the lovely Chariots of Fire moment. They come, they hug, they cry, all that good stuff. They're reunited. Jacob ends up accepting the gifts, and they part ways. Now, Jacob, he's still not feeling too well after the whole dislocated hip thing, so he makes camp before moving on to a town called Shechem. The lovely town of Shechem. There was a man in Shechem named what? Shechem. Okay. Shechem from Shechem. That's what it was. He takes an interest in Diana. The Bible says that he laid with Jacob's daughter by force. We don't know the full details of this. Shechem was clearly in the wrong. However, the Bible says that he loved her and that he spoke tenderly to her, and that he then asked his father to arrange a marriage between him and Diana with her father, Jacob. Now, Jacob and his brothers, they find out what happened. So when Shechem and father come into camp to ask permission to marry her, the brothers say that Diana can marry Shechem if he and the entire town do what? Circumcise themselves. Shechem, apparently there was some love here to some degree. He handled it extremely poorly. But he then convinces every male in the town of Shechem to go mutilate themselves so he can marry this woman. Okay, he apparently really liked Diana. 3 days after the surgery, how are they men feeling in Shechem? Yeah, we talked about, when you cut your finger, it's not so bad, but you wait a couple days until it gets nice and sore and inflamed, and then you're really feeling bad. So the brothers wait 3 days until everybody's nice and sore. And what two brothers to attack the town? Levi and Simeon. They slaughter the entire town because of what Shechem did to their sister. What do the rest of the brothers do? They're the nicer ones, I guess. They just go steal everything. They just loot the town. So, Shechem sinned. Brothers definitely sinned. This whole encounter is a very tragic incident all the way around. Now, Jacob, he doesn't seem to know about the brothers' plans, and he doesn't appear to be too happy about it when he finds out, because he then suddenly gets scared that if my family just slaughtered a town, there's other towns around here, they may see me as a threat and do what? Come attack our family unit. It's strong, but it's not that strong. So he then moves some 20 miles away to Bethel. He then decides to purify the camp. His brothers just went in, or sons just went in and slaughtered a town. Do you think they've had nice lessons of peace and love? I think there's some purification that needed to take care of that family. Jacob tries to do what he can at that point. Later, the group, they head to Bethlehem, and during the journey, Rachel gives birth to her second son, who was Benjamin. I'm just keeping track back there. However, what happens to Rachel immediately after the birth? She dies. She passes away. Rachel was Jacob's first love and his favorite wife, so suddenly Joseph and Benjamin become a lot more important in Jacob's eyes because that's his last living connection to his favorite wife. Not long after this, Isaac also passes away. He's buried by both Jacob and Esau. With Isaac's death, who gets the biggest share of the inheritance and control of the family unit now? Jacob or Esau? Jacob. He now received the birthright. He is technically in charge of the group. Again, we pointed out in Romans chapter 9, the older shall serve the younger. If we don't know our Old Testament history, Romans chapter 9 is not going to make a whole lot of sense to us anymore. Jacob is in charge of the family unit. However, Esau has some connections with some wives down south. They move to the land which will eventually be called Edom, where the Bible says he breaks the yoke of his brother Jacob. All right, Genesis then turns mostly to Joseph. Remember, he's a number 11 in the birth order. Not first, second, third, fourth. He's way down there, number 11. But how is he treated by his father? He's the favorite. He's a spoiled brat, to say the least. He was the first son of Jacob's favorite wife, so that kind of makes him kind of the firstborn favorite, I think, in Jacob's mind. I think that's how he justified it. And what was the most visible sign of this spoility? There, I'll make up a new word. The coat of many colors. There we go. All right, and this to the other sons basically symbolized a lack of love from their father. Now, along with being spoiled, like I said, he had that brat personality. Even at the age of 17, when he should have been an adult man and grown up and mature, he probably lied to his father about his brothers watching over the herds, made up some stories there, and then he has a couple dreams about being honored by his family. And he does what? He rushes off to tell the brothers, hey, guess what I dreamed about? You're going to bow down in front of me. So 1 through 10 probably didn't think too much of this. Number 11, telling them their dream. In fact, the Bible says they hated him. That's pretty strong language. Now, sometime after the dream, the brothers are away with the flocks, a different part of the country. So Jacob sends Joseph to check on him. His brothers see him approaching in the distance. How do they know it's him? Fancy coat of many colors. Hey, we can see him coming away off. What do they want to do? They want to kill him. Which brother steps in to stop him? Reuben. What are their idea then? Instead of killing him, we're gonna dump him in a cistern or a pit until we figure it out. Now, while Reuben's out on watch duty with the animals, the brothers see a caravan heading to Egypt, and they get an idea. Let's sell him as a slave. They get a little money in their pockets. They get Joseph out of their lives. This is a good deal. in their minds. Now, the brothers can't just return home and act like nothing happened. So what's their new plan? Let's take that lovely coat of many colors, let's get a bunch of blood on it, and let's say that we found it out in the desert somewhere. They return home, tell Jacob they found it in the wilderness. Does the plan work? Absolutely. Jacob is completely devastated. But the brothers, they're not suspected of anything. All right, Genesis then has our squirrel moment. Chapter 39, I think it is. We've got this Joseph, and then we have a sidebar to Judah, and then Joseph. Do you remember the Judah and Tamar story? I see like two heads nodded. All right. So Judah's oldest son marries a woman named Tamar. But that son is so evil, what's God do to him? He kills him. Now, you really don't have too many examples in the Bible of God just killing people. I mean, there's a few, but apparently you got to be pretty bad. I mean, think of all the other terrible people in the Bible. Ahab, just all these different kings. God doesn't strike them dead. But he killed Judah's son. Just, you're done. I don't know if it was lightning or what. So this son really ticked God off. God was not happy with him. We don't know exactly the whole instance, but God kills him, leaving Tamar without children. So Judah's second son steps up, marries Tamar like the custom was, but he's not better because he makes sure that we talked about Tamar doesn't become pregnant, so God just strikes him down too. There's hope for Tamar because Judah has a third son. He's a little younger, but Judah says when he grows up, you can marry him too. At least that's what he tells Tamar. Does he really want his third son marrying this woman who has already, in his mind, been responsible for killing two of his sons? Absolutely not. So he stalls. Tamar realizes what's going on. She takes matters into her own hands. She dresses up like a what? A prostitute. She has a little encounter with Judah. What's the exchange? What's the payment? Or I guess what's the collateral for the loan payment? The cord, the seal, and the staff. Basically that. Those were the three items that we talked about. So, and today, we're not all carrying cords, seals, and staffs. This would probably be equivalent to like your driver's license, your passport, and your car keys. Now, if you gave someone those items, would you want them back? Absolutely. But when the servant goes back to give her the lamb that Judah had promised and then take those home, Tamar has already disappeared. She's holding on to those items with dear life. Some months later, Judah finds out that Tamar is pregnant and declares that his daughter-in-law should be what? Stoned, kill her. She's been cheating. She's been sleeping around. They bring out Tamar. What does she have? The cord, the seal, and the staff. Those are pretty identifiable items. Judah suddenly realizes that, oops, that's me. How about the killer of the stone threats? Judah has a moment of humility and withdraws that. Tamar gives birth to two sons, the only two sons that she will have. Are those sons important? One of them, possibly. Yes. Who was that son's great somebody? Jesus Christ himself. So, if you think about it, the son that's Jesus' ancestor was the result of a union between a man and his daughter-in-law who was pretending to be a prostitute. These are not things you bring up a lot when you're talking about your family past to other people. But yet, God decided to send his son from that family. Do you think we should be embarrassed of ours? Do you think God can't use us because of our family past? I'm pretty sure he can. Meanwhile, down in Egypt, that was the squirrel moment with Judah. Come back to Egypt. Joseph, he was sold as a slave to who? Potiphar, what was his position? I hear a lot of mouth. Oh, there we go. We got one confident person. Captain of Pharaoh's bodyguard. That was Potiphar. Now, so you got to think of, this is not some little Egyptian guy. This is a really big, strong dude, A-type personality, captain of the guard. He got there because of his physical, appearance. Joseph does well, grows to where he's in charge of all of Potiphar's house. Potiphar has so much trust in him. He says, you run my house. I trust you, Joseph. This brings him in contact with who? Potiphar's wife. Why is this a problem? She wants to have a physical, a sexual relationship with Joseph. And does he go along with the deal? Absolutely not. He says, I cannot sin against Potiphar and God. So we start to see Joseph have a very strong connection here to God, because it's not sin against my master. It's sin against Potiphar and God. Even if Potiphar were in the picture, Joseph knows he could not do this because it's a sin against God. All right, so he runs out of the house. She has his cloak. I'm catching up here just so. There we go. There's a nice little picture. But Potiphar's wife still has his cloak, so it's time for the whole woman scorn thing to kick in. What does she tell Potiphar when he comes home? The Hebrew slave that you bought, you got to love that part, your slave attacked me. Now, does Potiphar, he's in charge of Joseph. He has absolute control. He can do many things here. He could kill him. He could whip him. He can start removing body parts. He can do whatever he wants. What's he choose to do instead? Throw him in prison, which is, he's the captain of the guard. He's in charge of Pharaoh's prison, so there's a prison nearby. We can throw him in there. But like we talked about, this was probably not the torture until you execute prison. This was probably the let's keep people confined just because we don't know what's going on until we figure out. So he throws Joseph in prison, but it probably wasn't that terrible of a prison. I think Potiphar knows his wife, and I think he knows what was going on, and he has great faith and trust in Joseph, and I think faith and trust in Joseph's God. When Joseph is in prison, he runs into a couple people. Who are they? The baker and the cupbearer of Pharaoh himself. Those two individuals have dreams. They're troubled about it. Joseph interprets those dreams through God. Good for who? The cupbearer. Bad for the baker. The dreams come true. The baker is executed. The cupbearer is returned to service with Pharaoh. Now, sometime later, the dreams keep coming on. This time, who has dreams? Pharaoh. What's he dream about? Cows and wheat. Cows and wheat. Joseph is still in prison, but the cupbearer makes a gutsy move and says, hey, boss, I know a guy. This guy in prison. Joseph is cleaned up. He's brought in front of Pharaoh himself. And again, through God, not Joseph himself, he interprets Pharaoh's dreams. He says there's going to be 7 years of famine coming, but right before that, there's going to be 7 years of plenty. Pharaoh exercises some wisdom, and he points Joseph to what position? Second in command of all of Egypt. Now, this is a pretty good career move. How did he enter the country? As a slave, and with a few years, you're now up in senior management. He is essentially running the country, except for Pharaoh himself being the more powerful. All right, so Joseph, he takes his job very seriously. He creates a system to collect and store all this grain through the years of plenty. He also finds time to get married, have a couple kids. What are the kids' names? Ephraim and Manasseh. Eventually, the 7 years of plenty give way, and you have 7 years of famine. And what family living in the land of Canaan suddenly needs food? Jacob and company. Yep, they hear about there being grain in Egypt, so the brothers, minus Benjamin, head south with money to buy food. All right, I talked about it's my personal feeling that all outside sales had to go through Joseph. Because who do the brothers find themselves in front of? Joseph. Do they recognize him? Absolutely not. It's been some 20 years. Joseph, he's probably dressed a whole lot different, eating some different food, just changed. They don't recognize him, but he immediately knows, hey, those are my 10 brothers. They come and they bow in front of the Egyptian Lord, which fulfills Joseph's dreams as a teenager of his brothers will bow in front of him. He's the second most powerful guy in the country, so he's probably surrounded by what? Probably some security individuals, carrying big, tight, big guys, some heavily armed individuals. They're there bowing in front of him. And what does Joseph yell? Spies! How do you think that worked out? You think the guys just suddenly turned white as sheet? Uh-oh, we're in trouble. And all the security kind of lower those sharp weapons, now point them somewhere? Joseph yells, "Spies," and he throws them in prison. Now, honestly, I think this shows pretty good restraint. They wanted to kill him, and they sold him as a slave instead. He just puts them in prison. I'm guessing why he thinks about it. But this starts the great test that Joseph has for his brothers. The whole point of everything that comes after this is he wants to see who his brothers are now. It's been 20 years. Have they changed? He wants to see if they're the same men that wanted to kill him, that didn't care about him at all, didn't care about their family, or if they've matured to the point that they're willing to sacrifice themselves for each other and for their family. And at the same time, he suddenly has a desire to reconnect with the family that he had tried to forget about for 20 years. That's everything that comes after this point, is that test. So 3 days in prison, Joseph goes and talks to them, says that if they aren't spies, they can prove it. They've been telling them about this family back at Canaan. All of you brothers minus one can go back to Canaan, bring this other missing brother you keep telling me about back, and then I'll believe you that you aren't spies. The brothers, they pay their fee, they get their grain. What's Joseph do with their money? Has it hidden back in their sacks? Absolutely. Which they discover on the way home. Once they get there, they tell Jacob what happened and say, "Hey, we got to take Benjamin and go back to Egypt so we can bring Simeon home." What's Jacob say? "No, you're not doing it. I've already lost Joseph, now I've lost Simeon. I'm not going to give you Benjamin, my last connection to my favorite wife." Okay, well, that's all well and good until a few months later when what happens? The food runs out. The brothers say, "Hey, we need to go back to Egypt and get more food, but we're not going to do it unless you send a brother." Jacob, he relents. He sends them back with more money, the original money, and also various gifts. And the brothers suddenly find themselves outside of Joseph's palace. And Joseph tells his servant to bring them on in. We're going to eat a meal together. Do the brothers feel really comfortable with this? No, they think they're being set up. And they think that this Egyptian lord has a grudge against them and is just using this as a pretext to imprison them or enslave them. However, the servant says, "Nope, I'm the one that gave your money back. Everything's good. Come on in the house." A healthy Simeon comes out and they're reunited. Joseph enters. The brothers still don't know who he is. However, after seeing Benjamin, what's Joseph do? He runs away crying because he's overwhelmed. This is his only true brother he has finally seen now. And he goes away and weeps. Once he composes himself, he comes back. They eat together. Benjamin gets 5 times as much as everybody else, but hey, there's a famine going on. They're just happy to have food. The other brothers probably don't even care. The 11 brothers then pack up and return home. But they have something different or something more in their sacks than just grain. They have the money and they have the silver cup of Joseph himself hidden in whose sack? Benjamin's sack. They get to travel in a distance. Joseph sends his servants, again, carrying lots of very sharp objects with them to intercept the group on their way back. They find them. They say, "Hey, why'd you steal our master's cup?" The brothers are confused. They didn't take anything. Look at our stuff. Go through it. We didn't take anything. The servant takes them up on it, but he says, "If I find the cup, what's going to happen to the person whose possessions I find the cup in? They will be my slave, and the rest of you can go." Those are the terms. The brothers, "Sure, look through it. We got nothing to hide," until they find the cup. They take Benjamin back to Egypt. Now, the condition was he's slave. The rest of them can do what? Do they go home? Carrying the food to their starving families that desperately need the grain. Did they go north, home, or did they go south, back to Egypt with their brother Benjamin? They go south. They go Egypt. They stick together. They don't abandon their brother. And that passes the first part of Joseph's test. All right, once they're back in front of Joseph, this is the last page, just in case you're keeping track. They're back in front of Joseph. Judah, number 4 brother, steps up to say that the brothers are sticking together and that they will all be Joseph's slaves now. So they could have gone home. They came back and they could have said, we're just going to leave. We're going to go now. But no, we are going to stay and we are all going to be your slaves together. This passes part 2 of Joseph's test. Joseph tells the rest of them, basically, get out of here and I'm keeping Benjamin. Judah then takes it up a notch. He says, fine, if they're going to leave, I'm going to stay and I want to take the place of Benjamin. I want Benjamin to go free. I want him to return back to his father, and I will take his place in a lifetitude of slavery to you. This is part 3 of Joseph's test. Is that a different individual from the one who wanted to kill his brother Joseph years and years before? He is sacrificing himself for his younger brother. Joseph, what's his reaction? Loses it, breaks down, crying, tears, because he realizes that these brothers, the ones that he probably hated and tried to forget, are now different people, and he reveals himself to them. Excuse me. So, lots of hugging and crying. Pharaoh finds out. He invites the whole family to come down to Egypt. Don't stay in Canaan anymore. We got food, we got water, we've got nice land for you. Just come on down. Sends wagons to go get them. Everybody packs up. Jacob is elated because the son that he thought he had lost is alive. They come down. They're reunited. Jacob is introduced to Pharaoh, who personally welcomes them into his country of Egypt. Excuse me. However, what does Pharaoh seem to get hung up on in this encounter? Remember? The age. You're how old? Because at this point, Jacob's 130 years. Now, does this make sense? What are the Egyptians kind of famous for? Trying to prolong life, both during life and after life. So it's just kind of funny that was what Pharaoh got caught up on during the whole encounter. Now, excuse me, there's still a famine going on, and Joseph still has a job to do. There's Egyptian people they've got to feed. Does Joseph just give it away for free? I mean, he's collected all this food during the years of plenty, and now it's time to disperse that back out. But is it free? No. First of all, he takes the money. Once the money's gone, he buys the livestock. I mean, this is 7 years. We got a long time here. After the livestock had been sold, what's he buy? The land. And then once the land's gone, he buys the people themselves. So in this period of 7 years, Pharaoh is now the legal owner of all the land, all the livestock, and all the people themselves, and has absolute power in the country. There is no more private ownership. Everything belongs now to Pharaoh because Joseph bought it for him. And this sets the stage for future pharaohs to become corrupted by the absolute power that they gained, I think, during this period, and suddenly to be seen now not only as the owner, but also as earthly gods. All right, so years later, at the age of 147, Jacob, he's nearing death, and he calls for Joseph and his sons. Jacob gives the double portion of the birthright to Joseph, the number 11 son, not the first, through his sons, and essentially claims Manasseh and Ephraim as his own. That creates the 12 tribes, once you take out Levi and Joseph, or the 12 individual portions of it. We talked about that, but I'm not going to go into that again. So he claims Ephraim and Manasseh. However, during the crossing of the hands incident, Jacob put Ephraim, the younger, in front of Manasseh, much to Joseph's displeasure. So then Jacob, he calls all of his brothers together, and he gives them each a blessing based on their futures, but also on their own characteristics. So we walked through with Reuben. No, it's back there if you want to see it. He's the strong, uncontrolled one. Simeon was the violent, dispersed one, along with his brother Levi. Judah was the prosperous leader. Zebulun was the seafarer, the trader. Issachar, he was the lazy, the unmotivated one. There we go. Dan, he was the judge, the cunning one. Gad was the vulnerable yet avenging. Asher, he was the blessed, the secure one. If you wanted to live in the land of Israel, you wanted to be in Asher. That was the place to be. Naphtali, he was the graceful, agile one. Joseph, he was the blessed savior of the group. And Benjamin was the ravenous warrior. These were the blessings that Jacob said, this is how not only you are, but this is how your descendants are going to be. And all of those prophecies came true. Now, after Jacob dies, what is he turned into? A mummy. Jacob becomes a mummy. Anybody want to walk through the mummification process again? You know, the rod up the nose, whip the brain up type thing? No? Okay. We won't do that. So Jacob is mummified, and then Joseph, his brothers, a lot of the important people of Egypt, and a substantial number of soldiers then transport Jacob's body back to Canaan and bury it in the cave of Machpelah with his ancestors. Now, after returning to Egypt, this is 40 years after they sold their brother. The brothers are still afraid that Joseph's going to take revenge on them. Now that dad's out of the way, we're in trouble. So they make up a story. They have a guilty conscience, and they say, Dad, he told us you need to forgive your brothers for what they did. Yeah, he told us that before he died. You weren't there, but he told us that. We were supposed to tell you. Joseph sees through this. He's, I think, pretty hurt, but he says, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. Finally, there is now closure with the brothers. There's been this tension for 40 years. Finally, you get that closure. 50 years after this event, Joseph, he finally dies. After living a long life, he gets to see his descendants grow up. However, before he dies, he calls his family together, kind of similar to what Jacob did, calls the family together, but he tells them that Egypt is just your temporary home. One day, our descendants are going to return to the land of Canaan, and that I want my body to be taken with them. I want to also return to Canaan. Well, he's going to be turned into a mummy too, so it's going to be easy to do some hundreds of years later. But this is, I think, the whole summary point of Genesis. Because this is how I want to be. When my time's drawing near, I want to tell my family that Earth is a temporary home. This is not our permanent place. We have a better place that we are going to all get to go to, that we are all going to be reunited with in heaven. That's how Genesis ends. Our home is temporary. Heaven is eternal. So I love the way that fits out and that closes the very first book of the Bible. So next time we are going to move on into Exodus. We're going to continue to see how the promise of God was worked through the lives of the Israelite people, and that his son ultimately came from that line, and that he opened it up to all nations, Jews and Gentiles. Questions or comments? Ooh, I went long. Yes, sir.
Should this also be a lesson about the relationship between those that made mistakes and those that had the lesson?
You could turn it.
So that when you die, you'll be able to give them the lesson not to make the mistakes that others have made.
I think there's so many lessons and applications you can pull out of this. Yeah, but let somebody else make the mistake before you make the mistake. Learn from their mistake is the best way, but actually we see the opposite in Genesis because their fathers made dumb mistakes and they just keep making them. So yeah, there's definitely a lesson for that. So. All right, well, we will go ahead and close out. Thank you for bearing with me as I went long, but I'll go and pray and we'll end up. Father, we just thank you for another day of life. Thank you for this opportunity to be together, to study the amazing word that you laid down for us, to see the opportunities, the way you worked through people's lives, people that were not perfect, people that were just like us, and be reminded that you can use us to be your servants. Please be with us now as we go out in the world. Help us just be lights for you and help us to bring others to Christ. In his name we pray. Amen.